With the Eibishter's help, we are beginning Masechta Zevachim Daf Lamed Beis, and we're going to start from the new parak on Daf Lamed Aleph Lamed Beis, and the parak begins Kol Hapsulim. So here we go. Kol Hapsulim Sheshachtu. Any person that is pasul, that means is disqualified from being a kohen. Let's say, for example, a kohen that has a balmum, or anybody. We'll see what that means. Sheshachtu, that they did the shchita. We know this din to be true. Shchitas and keshera. The shchita is a kosher shchita, because you don't need a kohen to do the shchita for a carbon. It could be anybody. So the Mishnah continues. Shahashchita, the shchita, slaughtering, is keshera bezarim, is kosher, even a non-kohen. Whereas, let's say, Kabbalah, catching the blood, Hailacha, bringing the blood to the Mizbeach, Zrika, sprinkling on the Mizbeach, have to be done with a kohen. Shchita is kosher bezarim with a non-kohen. Ubenashim, and not only that, a woman could be a shoichet. A woman not only could shecht in a chulin, she could shecht animals. She could even shecht in the base of Migdash. Uva avodim, and a slave. And a slave is someone who just who is a ger, who has mitzvahs like an isha. So it's an evet kanaini. Could also slave. Could also be a sheichet. Ubit beyim, and even somebody who's tamei. So here it's a little bit of a problem. How could a tamei go into the base of Migdash? Here is a picture of the base of Migdash, right, on your screen. When you tamei is not allowed to go to the area, which we're going to show right now, which is the area just beyond that door where the Mizbeach is. See in the red, I have the Mizbeach, and particularly Shecht. How could a Kohen Shecht, how could somebody who's tamei, although you tell me he's kosher to shecht, how could he enter into that area, into the area where you shecht? And so the Gemara is going to tell us, the Gemara tells us elsewhere, that really the tamei stands outside the door, or right over here, and he has this long knife that shechts into the by the Mizbeach, probably on the north side. He has this very, very long knife. Now, the other problem is, true that he shechts, but isn't he making the knife tamei? And the knife tamei is going to be mitama the carbon. The answer is, we're talking about a person who's only tamei sheretz. So he himself will not be mitame the knife. He's a av, and he won't be mitame the kalim. Or you can say he's using a type of knife that's not makabel toma, like a reed or something like that. So the bottom line is, we're talking about a tamei that shechts with a very, very long knife. That's kosher. Now back into the Mishnah. Even if it's totally kachi kachim, the highest form of a carbon, like a carbon chatas. Make sure that the tamei, even though he's shechting with this long knife, don't bring him the meat to touch, because once he touches the meat, the whole carbon becomes pasa. So therefore, lefichach, says the Mishnah, if all these people, zarim, nashim, avodim, can all do shchita, hein poislim b'machshava. If they have a wrong thought when they do the shechting, then they could passel the carbon. We go to Lamed Beis Amud Aleph. Now, the kulan and all these things, now all these pesulim, these disqualified people, if they did the Kabbalah, if they did the Kabbalah, the catching of the blood, they did the catching of the blood, thinking about that they're gonna, spray the blood or eat the carbon in the wrong time or in the wrong place. So if you think about doing such a thing, you could passel the carbon. But they're not the ones that could passel the carbon, because they're not the ones that are supposed to be doing that avodah of catching the blood. So if they did that, the carbon is not passel. because all you got to do, im yesh dam hanefesh, if you still have soul blood is blood, real blood that you sprinkle on the mizbeach, the first bloods of the animal. If you still have that blood left in the animal, yachzer hakosher v'yikabel. Let somebody who is a kohen, who's a kosher kohen, go back and catch the blood, because the carbon is not possible if somebody else, if a puzzle did the Kabbalah. What happens? Kibel HaKosher, a kosher Kohen caught the blood, the Nasan apostle, and gave it over to a non-kosher Kohen so that now you have a problem. So what should you do? How do you rectify it so that you don't puzzle the carbon? Yachsel kosher, return it back to the kosher Kohen and let him, sprinkle the blood on the Mizbeach. Let's say kibel b'minoi. Let's say we know everything has to be done with your right hand. Let's say he caught the blood with the vessel in his right hand. V'nasan l'smoilin, then put it into his left hand. Oh, did he passel the carbon? No. Yachser liyamina, you return it back to your right hand. The carbon is not passel. Kibel b'kli kodesh. Let's say he caught the blood in a holy vessel. Okay, that's the way you're supposed to do it. V'nasan l'kli chayil, and then he put the blood into a non-holy vessel. So then, did he passel the carbon? No. Yachsel l'kli kodesh. He should return it back to the holy vessel. Nishpach min hakli al ritzvah. Let's say as he's walking to the mizbeach, he has this blood container full of blood, and he spills the blood onto the floor of the on the mizbeach before on the floor of the Beis Hamikdash. So v'asafa, really you shouldn't gather it back in, but he somehow swept it all back into the container. Kosher, you could still do zrika with this blood. Then the Mishnah says, Nesonoi al gabe hakevish, if you put the blood on top of the ramp. Now, really, in the carbonos, you're supposed to here's the illustrations. You're supposed to have the carbonos sprinkled in the right place. So there's corners where you sprinkle it, right? You sprinkle it, and he put it onto the keves, onto the ramp, right? Let me give you a picture of the mizbeach. Instead of sprinkling it on the corners, he just put the blood on the ramp. So then that's fine. Or shloi kineged haisai, or nosan esaniton lamata lamala vesaniton lamala lamata. Let's say he mixed it up. The carbon that's supposed to be sprinkled on the lower part of the mizbeach, he put it in the upper part of the mizbeach. And let's say it was a carbon that was supposed to be given on the upper part of the mizbeach, he put it by the lower part of the mizbeach. Or vesaditonim b'fnim b'chutz. Let's say he was supposed to sprinkle the blood inside the building. Certain bloods are supposed to be going into that main sanctuary and being sprinkled onto the curtain, right? And what he did was he sprinkled it on the outside mizbeach. And what was supposed to be sprinkled on the outside mizbeach, he brought it into the mizbeach. So then it didn't passel the carbon. Im yesh dam hanefesh, if still soul blood in the animal, in the carcass, yachzer, you go back, collect new blood, hakosher, v'yikabel, collect the new blood, and then do it right. We learned in the Mishnah Shachtoi that all these people, let's say a woman or a non-kohen, Shachtoi, that b'di eved in lechatchila, that only ex post facto we allow them to shech, but really lechatchila we don't allow them to shecht. We want a kohen to shecht. Is that true? Or a minhi, I'm going to ask you a contradiction. V'shachat, the Torah tells you shachat, shchita bezar kashera, that a shchita with a non-kohen is kosher. This brisa says, lechatchila, you could use a non-kohen. Shashchita kashera bezarim, uvanashim, uvavodim, uvatmeim, afilu kache kachem. Any type of korban is always kosher with a non-kohen, a woman, a slave, anybody could be a shaychit. Says the Brisa, maybe the Torah said that only a kohen could shecht. Amrit, I will tell you, where are you coming from? The Torah only says it should be slaughtered. The Torah doesn't say a kohen should shecht. So I would think like this, maybe Mikhlal Shnema, because the pasuk says Va'ato v'necho itcha tishmru es kunasachem l'chol dvar mizbeach. The Torah tells you that the kohenim should make sure anything related to the mizbeach they should be taken care of. Yochel, I would think, af b'shchita, that I would think only that includes shchita. Shchita should be only be done by a kohen. I would think so. Talmud loima v'shachas ben agava abokal lifnei Hashem v'krivu hakohanim. So the first the Torah says anybody could shech, and from the catching of the blood, there the Torah emphasizes a kohen. Mikabala ve'elach mitzvahs kuna limed ala shchita shekasher b'nei adam. That teaches you that a shchita is kosher for by anybody could do the shchita. It's only from catching of the blood and other services that has to be performed by a kohen. But what you see from this brisa is that lechatchila a non-kohen could shecht. So how could our Mishnah say that a non-kohen b'di'evet shechted, then it's okay? So the Gemara says, Hu adin, our Mishnah agrees with that. Even lechatchila non-kohen could shecht. But mishum de kaboy lemisne tameim, since on the list is a tamei person, and a tamei person we don't really want him to shech, even lechatchila, even with that long knife, the lechatchila loy. Why? Because I'm always afraid he might, reach in and touch the meat after he slaughtered it. So Tana, that's why the Bryce that's why our Mishnah says shech shachtu, that only after if they shechted it, to call psulim shechtu. If b'diavad we want them to shech, because Tameh we really lechatchila don't want him to shech because of the gezerah. Says the Gemara, v'tameh. One last question: v'tameh di'avad shaper dami. B'diavad a tameh could really shecht? Can a tameh really shecht an animal? Uraminu, let me ask you a question. The Brisa says the samach v'shachet, that the owner of the carbon does smicha, puts his hand on the head of the animal and does smicha. V'shachat, and then you shech the animal. So it puts those two, the pasuk puts those two ideas together. So we make a hekesh. Ma smicha b'tarim, just like smicha has to be done with someone who is pure, not tamei. Av shchita b'tarim. So we darshan that al shchita can only be done by a tar. So how could our Mishnah say that a tamei could shecht? This brisa seems to say a shechting has to be done by somebody who is ritually pure. Answers the Gemara midrabanan. This brisa is midrabanan. It's not really a minat Torah. It's just like the rabbanan. We only want somebody who's pure to shecht. Now, this understood, just to explain the brisa understood that smicha has to be done with somebody who's pure. Maishno smicha. How do you know smicha has to be done with somebody who's pure? Because the pasuk says, Lifnei Hashem. You do smicha when he's in the azara. When he's in, past this door over here, that's when the person who owns the carbon does the smicha. Says the Gemara, is that true? Shchita nami yaksiv lifnei Hashem. But shchita it also says you shech the animal lifnei Hashem. So apparently it has to be done in a place, and the shochet has to be in the place where he's allowed to enter, which is past those big doors into the azara. So why is shchita kosher with a tamei? So answers the Gemara, Efsha de abed sakin aruka v'shachet. Maybe the Torah says the animal has to be in the azara, but it's possible the Torah would allow, the Torah meant that if you make a long knife and shech, that's good enough. So then how do you know smicha has to be done when the owner is pure? Smicha nami efsha de ma'al yadei b'samach. The guy could be right by the door and put his hands in and do the smicha. Because if you look at this picture, if a guy who brings his carbon could bring it up to the door over here and then just stick his hand to put his hands on the animal, and that's lifnei Hashem because he's right in front of the Beis Hamikdash. Answers the Gemara, that's not going to work. Kasavar bia b'mitzvah shma bia. Once you put your hands through the door, that's called coming in a little bit. And if you're coming in a little bit, that's called that you entered this part of the azara, and therefore that's usher. You see, a tamei can't go beyond this door, and you can't give him advice for a tamei who owns an animal to come up to the door and stick your hand in and do the smicha. Because once you put your hands in, it's as if your whole body is in there, and therefore that would be usher. That would be karis. Once a tummy goes into the azara, you're not allowed to go into the base of Migdash when you're tummy. But for shchita, since you're not putting your hands in, you're putting the knife in, that's you didn't even enter, so then a tummy could do the shchita. So that's the difference between smicha and shchita. Rav Chizda masni epcha. Rav Chizda taught the opposite. V'samach v'shachet ma shchita b'tarin. Just like shchita had to be done with somebody who's ritually pure. Av smicha b'tarin. So smicha had to be somebody who was tahar. Ma'ishno shchita. How did you know shchita had to be with somebody who's pure? The ksiv lifnei Hashem, because it says lifnei Hashem. So you have the sheichet has to be in the azara. So I don't need a posik to juxtapose smicha to shchita. Smicha nami ksiv lifnei Hashem. We go to Amid Beis. Smicha also says lifnei Hashem. So I wouldn't need to juxtapose. Oh, smicha has to be done by a tar because it's compared to shchita. It's once the Torah says v'samach yodei lifnei Hashem, so it must be that the person entered the sanctuary. Answers the Gemara. This part learns Efshad ba'al yadai v'samach. You put your hands in and then you do the smicha, which means that you're not coming, even though you put your hands in, the way we learn now, just putting your hands in is okay. It's not considered as if your whole body came in. So then how do I know shchita has to be done with a sheichet inside the Beis Hamikdash, inside the Azara? Shitanami, after the oven sakin aruka v'shachet. Maybe shchita was talking about you did it with a long knife, and then that's how you shechted. Answers the Gemara, Hamani, that brisa go that way. The version of what we're dealing with, the way Rav, I think it was Rav Chizda, had a version different than the brisa. That the brisa is of this opinion of Shimon HaTimni, very important person. Shimon HaTimni is the exception. He holds the Tanya we learned in the brisa, that the animal has to be in the azara, but not the shoichet, not the slaughterer. But Shimon HaTimni says, that the slaughterer has to be even further inside than the animal itself. Talmud loyma v'shochet as ben abakar lifnei Hashem. Shoichet as a bakar, yay lifnei Hashem. The shochet is referring to the slaughterer, and he has to be more closer than the animal in front of the sanctuary. So since this brisa goes according to Shimon HaTimni, who says for certainly that you can't shecht with a long knife, Shimon HaTimni says that the Chumash implies that the shoichet himself has to be beyond this wall. So what we learned so far is that there is an opinion, Shimon HaTimni, who says, no, when you shecht an animal, the shoichet and the animal have to be lifnei Hashem, inside, beyond the doors. But our Mishnah says a tomei could shecht an animal. He doesn't have to be inside the azara. He could just shecht with a long knife and be outside the azara. In the course of what we discussed, Ama'ula, we learned before, Amar Shlakish, Tamei Sheichnis Yada Lifnim Loika. A Tamei that stuck his hand through those doors, like as I said, a Tamei stand at the door, stuck his hand through the door. According to Ula, he would get Malchus, Loika. Shnema, B'chol Kodesh Leisiga, Evel Migdash Leisavai. The Torah tells you that someone who's tamei cannot eat kachim, not allowed to touch kachim, and can't come into the base of Migdash. Makish biel negia. So we compare, juxtapose, coming into the base of Migdash to touching kachim. Ma negia b'miktzas, just like when you touch something, it's you partially touch something. Af bia b'miktzas. So also, af bia b'miktzas shma bia. Even if you just stick your hands through those doors, that's considered you came into the base of Migdash tamei, and therefore you're coming into Machne Shechina Tamei, and because of that, therefore you get karas, so you get Malchus. So that's what the Ula says. Bia b'mitzvah shma bia. So Eisvei Rabbi Shai Ula of Shaya asked Ula, Mitzorah shechol shmini shaloi lias be'er Pesach a Mitzorah. Now we know a Mitzorah, interestingly enough, would stand at this door of Shar Nikner and stick his hand in because they had to do some parts on his ears and his thumbs, and the blood of the asham and the oil have to be on his ear of his thumb, his earlobe, his thumb, and his toe. So he had to actually stick part of his body into the Torah tells you that. And the Torah tells you that if it's, let's say, the eighth day, where he could be matar himself from becoming a Mitzorah, it fell out on Erev Pesach. And V'ro carried by Bayom. And he accidentally had an emission, like a nocturnal emission that day, V'toval, and he went to the mikveh. Now, normally, a Balkari cannot come into this place. A Zav or even a Tvul Yom of a Balkari cannot even come into the place prior to the doors. Not a Tumei Sheretz, but a Tumei Zav cannot go into this. And yet, we have this Mitzorah, who now is a Tvul Yom for a Keri, so he's like a Zav. But if we don't allow him, then he won't be able to be Mitar himself from Mitzorah, and he won't be able to bring his carbon Pesach that night or eat from the carbon Pesach. So Amr Chachamim said, the Brisa says, Afal pi she'ein Tvul Yom acha nichnas, even though we don't allow a Tvul Yom, someone who went to the mikveh to go into that area, Zeh nichnas. This guy could go into that area of the Ezras Nashim, that's what it's called. Mutav Yave Esesh Yesh Beikaras, V'yitche Esesh Shein Beikaras. Because I would want him to do the carbon Pesach. Because carbon Pesach, if you don't do it, it's like it's a mitzvah saseh, that if you don't do it, you get karas. So that should be an essay, should override the essay that doesn't have karas, which means there was an essay that a tamei should not enter this. So it's a weaker essay. But he has this chiyuv to somehow make himself pure to be able to to eat from the carbon pasach at Seder night. So therefore, if we have a Mitzorah, who normally, a Mitzorah himself, who is tahar and everything like that, he just needs to have the carbon sprayed on his ear. So he's a mchusab kapurim. We allow him to come here. We're going to allow him, if he became a tvil yoim, also to come here, a tvil yoim from a keri, to come here to allow this, sprinkling on his ear. But that presumes that going into that area for a tvil yoim is an essay. He shouldn't do that l'chatchil if he was just a tvil yoim. Rabbi Yochanan says you don't have to go so far. Devar Torah afilu essay ein boy. There is no essay. Shneimar, Pasuk says, "Vayama Yeshafet bekal Yus Yehuda v'Yishlayim bebeis Hashem lefnei chatzar chadasha." My chatzar chadasha. Yeshafet stood by that, Ezras Nashim. Amar Rabbi Yochanan shechitshi b'dvarim v'amru tvil yom al yikaris l'machne l'viyam. Really, midaraisa, a tvil yom could enter here. It's the Rabbanan that Rabbanan made it that a tvil yom shouldn't enter here. If you're just a tvil yom of a keri, so. This was instituted Rabbanan. So if a person has a mitzvah to bring a carbon Pesach, certainly it will be overridden his need to bring a carbon Pesach, to purify himself for a carbon Pesach, on this, the Rabbanan. Okay, now, be Amrit, be a b'mitzvah shma bia, but if you're saying that just sticking your ear in there and you're sticking a part of your body is as if you came into the Azara, heicham al yadei b'bahainis. How does a Mitzorah ever stick his hand with his fingers? If he's like a zav, according to the first opinion, that we consider him a zav, that just because you went to the mikveh, we consider you like a zav. Okay, a Mitzorah could stick his ear in there, but once he's a tful yoim, once he's a zav, when he sticks his finger in when he sticks his thumb into that room beyond that door, we consider it as if he's a whole tummy that went into the Beis Hamikdash, that went into the Ezras Yisrael, the Ezras Kahanim. So how do we allow that to happen? Answers. So the Gemara is going to say like this: Amalei that's a chorus. If a Tvul Yoim enters the Beis Hamikdash, Amalei. So he said to him, "Betunach." From that load. The answer is, since we're allowing this Mitzorah person to stick his finger into that, beyond that door, as a Mitzorah, we're going to allow that person to stick his finger, even though he is a tful yom for a carry. Once it's mutter already for him, then it's always mutter. But for a non-mitzayra, then it's not permitted to do that. Only because he already has an exemption, so we allow him to stick his fingers beyond that door if he's a tful yom for a carry. Let's finish up in 1 minute. Amar Rav Yosef says, Ksava Ula Ula held Reuben Zavin. He just extends what Ula said. If, let's say, if you're going to start saying once something is permitted, let's do it this way. Reuben Zavim. If most of Klal Yisrael is a Zav, you don't bring a carbon Pesach. But then, Vinasa Tmei Mason, they became a Tmei Mason. So now, can everybody bring their carbon Pesach? You're going to say like this, since we know that Tuma Hutru B'Siba, Tmei Mace, if all the tzibur, if the entire congregation is Tmei Mace, you can bring carbonis. So then, even though they're a Zav, in addition to that, Hutru L'Zivasam, we'll extend it. Once they have this license to go into the Beis HaMikdash as a Tmei Mace, they have the license to go into the Beis HaMikdash as a Zav. Amalei Abayis, so Isaiah says, "Mi dami." How can you compare that? Tuma ishtarai is evil ishtarai. Tuma is not permitted. Tuma is permitted, but ziva is not permitted. And they first became a zav, and then they became a tamei meis. That shouldn't work. So Amalei, so Abaye said to Rav Yosef, "Did you mean the opposite? You meant the opposite. Reuben tamei meis v'nasan zavim. If they were first a tamei meis and then they become a zav, hoyel v'hutrul tumasan hutrul zivasam. So since they already permitted because they became a tamei meis, and Klal Yisrael is permitted to do the carbon as a tamei meis, then they're permitted to do the carbon if they became a ziva on top of that. Amalei in. So Rav Yosef said, that's exactly what I meant to say. So Abaye is going to ask one question, and Rav is going to answer it. Akati, Rabbi says, Laidami lemitzoira, heterahu, hoiv ishtri, tuma dechiyehu, laha itche. Concludes the Gemara, you want to extend what Ula said. Ula said that a mitzvah is permitted, once you're a mitzvah and you're permitted to stick your finger in, so then even if you're a balkari, you could also stick your finger in, if you're both the same. Since it's mutter, as a mitzvah, you're mutter as a balkari as well. But that only works by mitzvah, who's a balkari. But here, Tumas Maze is overridden. It's the chuya. Means it's not really what we want. It's not permitted. It's overridden. We say it could go. Maybe it overrides Tumas Maze, but it will not override Tumas Zav. Amalei Rava, so Rava said like this, Adarab, Ipchumis Rab, I'll say the opposite. Mitzayra heteru. Mitzayra is a heter, and Laha Ishtri, Laha Ishtri. I could say that it's permitted only for Mitzayra and not for a Tful Yoim, who's a Balkari. Tuma Dechuyahi, Tuma is overridden. Mali Chad Dechuyah, Mali Shtei Dechuyahs. Who cares if it's one override and what another override? Okay, we'll stop over here, and this sugi will continue tomorrow.